Greetings from Gijon, Spain, and for the very first time ever, by starting a conversation with my friend Ian, I will also say who actually Ian is for those unfortunate viewers who actually don't know him yet. Well, Ian, I don't want to condense it too much in a few words, because this would be insulting, if I could.
Let them discover who I am.
Yes. Okay, I will tell it at the end of the video if you didn't understand.
I will give you a clue. We are drinking a Rioja, which would be called Ian if I modify the label slightly. As it is called Lan.
There is another trick. If you want to know who he is and you are not able to understand that by yourself with your own brain, you can simply Google Ian Watson and then you may start to know.
Yes, because I still appear quickly when people search for me.
Good.
Rather like the demon or Satan. Anyway, we are not going to talk about coronavirus today. I will explain why. And this will be a blessedly short chat show of only 15 minutes because the Grand Prix is happening in Deutschland in another 2 hours. And before that happens, we have to go out and buy special breads for Roberto, the interviewer, who will be passing through Spain tomorrow on National Holiday Day, when everything is not working.
And since we are living in special times, I think that one of our focus could be on the concept of dystopia and why the people don't realize when they're entering dystopia.
Well, there are different theories. There is the boiling frog theory, which is that you put a frog into a pan of cold water and then gradually increase the heat. According to this theory, the frog does not realize that it is getting gradually warmer and warmer and warmer and stays in the water and boils to death. But I do not know that anybody has actually performed this experiment in reality. I want to see a frog in a pan, and I believe strongly that it will jump out of the water at a certain stage. There are a lot of banal cliches which circulate and substitute for thinking among the human race. Another one, for example, is the idea that swans, cisnes, are very serene on the surface of the water, but that their feet are working furiously at express speed underneath the water. This is complete bollocks, because they have huge feet which they only need to move gently in order to travel. The world is full of completely inaccurate pictures which distort our view of reality.
Exactly, and this is especially true on the fractal scale. So we have started with micro misunderstandings and micro illusions, but then as we raise our point of view, we see that the mistakes are bigger and bigger, and they can jeopardize one's vision of reality entirely. So,
well, I have to, unfortunately, mention coronavirus at this moment, because actually the virus is of no importance or significance at all as regards lethality, when you compare it with the true Black Deaths of the Middle Ages, hemorrhagic fevers, which were deadly with a kill rate of 90% sometimes. But we are obsessing with this fairly trivial disease, which will only kill a small percentage of it. It might be me, because I am in a danger category, but that would not matter as regards the future and the continuity of the human race and life on this planet. We are devoting enormous amounts of resources and rituals which are preventing us from even thinking about the true threats to our survival. For example, the accelerating pace of climate catastrophe.
And basically this could suggest us possibly also a connection with the idea that actually we are now reducing consumption because the GDPs of every country is collapsing by 10% or so this year. So probably planes don't fly so much as usual, so they pollute less and they consume less carbon fuels. So maybe this pandemic could be meant to decrease this problem.
As far as the statistics I have read are concerned, it makes no damn difference at all compared with the growth rate. When a growth rate becomes a more shallow growth rate, it's still a growth rate.
Yes.
We actually need to reduce considerably economic growth by reversing all of our, unfortunately, desires and dreams. We must not go on holiday in cheap planes to stand with 10,000 other people on King Charles Bridge in Prague. We must not consume to the extent that we have done. We must not drink wines from New Zealand, even though cheers. This is from Spain, where I live. Arguably, it is cheaper to bring these giant ships full of wine to Europe, but bollocks to that, because people are not considering true costs. For example, wind power. Wind turbines cost more to produce and to maintain and to replace than any saving of a carbon footprint because of the electricity which they irregularly produce. Even the wings, the aspas, the blades of the wind towers cannot be recycled. They have to be buried in giant graves close to the place where they became too damaged to continue working, because it takes two enormous lorries to remove one single blade and take it somewhere.
So this basically implies that sometimes what we perceive as ecological is anti-ecological.
Yeah, and this is because we don't consider the complete process involved in production. Ships, cruise ships, for example, they are attempting to relaunch the cruise industry with completely clean ships and passengers who have been in quarantine for 2 weeks before they get on board, and who will go into quarantine for 2 weeks afterwards. Why they would want to, I don't know. But the cruise ship will then go to sea and go nowhere because it will not then become it will not then become infected. It will just go around in circles in the sea.
That's fascinating. So basically the people will pay a shitload of money to get onto a ship where they can actually gain a quarantine guaranteed when they go back, that they have to, and then they are basically quarantining, going in a round circle, you know, out of the harbor, having the illusion of a cruise ship when actually they're just only hanging around.
Yeah, so what are they enjoying? They're going to have to wear a mask in the ship and maintain social distancing. Quite possibly they will have to eat their food in their cabin with no view of the sea. It will be excellent food, because this is one reason to be on a cruise ship. And indeed, they could have lectures by a virtual lecturer on the history of ancient Greece, for example, or how to make soap.
This is suggesting me that actually in a new dystopia, people will actually pay for the dystopia. They will be willing, you know, to join it, you know, unlike, you know, all the stereotypes that we have been fed
Yes.
on about how a dystopia looks like, with the people oppressed against their will. Actually, they are oppressed with their intention, and they have also to pay for the persecution.
Yes. It is an object of desire, the dystopia. the cruise ship which goes nowhere,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah, probably because people have learned, like at school, in the manual of dystopias, which are the available dystopias that actually will one day hit. And so now they are programmed to recognize this kind of standardized franchising dystopias, which will never happen because we will have new dystopias that they won't recognize because they won't wear the uniform of the dystopia.
Absolutely. So we will stop talking about coronavirus or even mentioning the word because it is a distraction. Now, I am not saying that it does not kill lots of people, but one point is that the planet now has a 150% bigger population than it can maintain and sustain. We actually do need rapidly to reduce population.
Yes, and so basically what's going on is actually the so-called solution. Could it be that the media has started to say that from the very first day when the coronavirus lockdowns, they say that the normality was the problem. So basically it's a kind of branding of the dystopia as a solution to a bigger problem.
Well, most of the media, like say 99%, are idiots for whom a coronavirus pandemic emergency is golden material. They do not think beyond what they ought to be investigating, but they can waste our time by giving us statistics which are probably false, and by hysterically saying 273 people died in Palermo today. What does that mean? Based on what system of counting? Nothing is ever explained enough. There is enormous distraction of attention from reality.
Yes, and this is achieved by zooming into the problem to see the micro problem.
Yes.
So you have a continuous zoom into little details, which takes you completely out of the view of the whole, which is the big problem, while actually we are now completely terrorized about a disease that from the global scale doesn't really change anything, for the human beings.
It probably is killing less than the rise in birth rate, which accompanies it.
Yes, so basically it's an incredible experience that we have the honor, to witness.
And of course we also have hospitals which are unable to treat actual diseases, actual lethal diseases such as terminal cancers, where the patients die through lack of attention because, well, for example, the hospital is dedicated to putting tubes, ventilators into people, which we know result in 50% death, and then in those people who survive, many are brain damaged and physically disabled. What the fuck is the point of that?
And this is only the beginning, probably, of this new dystopia where we have now the privilege, to spend some time.
It is. We have lived through the height. This was the theme of the Matrix. Where could they set in time the simulation? The height of civilization was Chicago 1998 or something like that. Well, okay, we have reached the height of civilization and we have gone beyond it now, and we are on the downslope.
Yes, which has been foreseen by science fiction for a long time, but now most science fiction writers don't seem to recognize that they are living the kind of dystopic scenarios that they have been foreseeing.
That is because most science fiction writers have little acquaintance with the history of science fiction in the past, because history has ceased for the majority of educated people in the West at about 1995. The majority of the population do not know what happened in the past, and probably do not believe it.
Yes, and this leads to some...
It is
yes.
it is ignorance, which is a deplorable ignorance. This is one of the reasons why science fiction writers are not able to cope with the new normality, unquote. And the other is that they write fantasy, not science fiction. And another reason is that they are sustaining their own background identities through the medium of science fiction, rather than thinking about the future. Secondly, that they are reinventing things which were already invented.
Well, I think this is one of the most problematic situations, the fact of reinventing things which have been invented, or to imagine a future starting from a fictitious present, because my personal perception is that most of them don't really grasp, the true nature of present now, and then actually what they write starts to be a kind of fantasy future, because
yes.
it's...
If you think about the speed of history within the past 5,000 years, and try to feel like if you were 2,000 years ago, or even less than that, in North Africa, you would be walking out into a landscape of trees, elephants, hippopotamus, not into a landscape of sand and desert. We assume that change happens slowly over a long scale, but it also happens very rapidly. And we forget. And we forget history. Who has paid attention much to the so-called Spanish flu at the end of the First World War, which killed more people in the world, millions and millions, than the First World War? It has been blocked from consciousness, and so much else has not even got into consciousness to be remembered.
Yeah, I think that probably most of the people today have no clue that the Spanish flu happened at all, so it's forgotten completely.
Yeah, and therefore what we did about it and reactions and the results are forgotten too, even though they are documented on film.
Mm-hmm.
Even on film they're documented,
yeah.
But it has disappeared. And this is the problem with the majority of contemporary science fiction, that it has no consciousness of history.
Yes, and I think that one bias of a lot of science fiction authors is the fact that they are led to believe that what they have always framed in their mind as fiction, like a dystopia, like certain scenarios, they can't be actually real in the real world, so that when they happen, they misinterpret them as a fiction, but it's not. So it's because they're used to consider. I mean, there are so many people who have read, for example, the Philip K. Dick novels, where actually they discovered that everything was just fake.
Yes, yes.
But none of these people usually, when actually a similar scenario happens in the real world, they actually acknowledge it. It's like because they say, okay, this looks like a Philip K. scenario, so it cannot be true, because Philip K. Dick was mad and was writing fiction.
Well, the popular media for a long time were saying, oh, this sounds like science fiction, but it is real. Why was it within science fiction? It's because back then, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, people envisaged it, and the world at large denied it, especially the mainstream cultural media. Now, they cannot distinguish between reality and invention, but the inventors are not being imaginative enough, because they are copying how they think a prize-winning science fiction should be written, with the aim, number one, of being published, and the aim, number two, of becoming well-known, famous, and winning awards. This is not the point of writing, this is not the point of science fiction. And also, I do not believe any longer that the point of science fiction is to encourage us to colonize Mars, to go to the nearest star for Centauri, because I think this is actually impossible. Certainly we can have a suicide colony on Mars, suicide in the sense that it's going to fail and die out within 200 years at most. We cannot go to the nearest star systems. All of the headline clickbait statements about 50 super habitable Earths within 4,000 light years are rubbish. When you actually read these stories written by idiot journalists who do not understand science and who cannot actually think, these turn out to be completely uninhabitable places which it would take us 1,000 years to reach if we had a superior technology than we do now.
And much superior technology.
Yes, well, the control of energy. I have no idea how you would develop an energy system which can take us to 10% of the speed of light, even. And even if you go to that incredibly high speed, you have to slow down at the other end somehow.
Yes, and you need quite some energy for that too.
Yeah, and it still takes you, well, the nearest star is 4.2 light years away, so therefore 10% of the speed of light means that it takes you 40 years minimum to travel there. I mean, excluding acceleration, because you can't just press the button and suddenly accelerate to 10% of the speed of light, or everything is crushed completely flat.
And the crew has to survive cosmic rays for the whole time, little micro asteroids, and a lot of little things that on the long term appear in the vacuum.
The failure of the body.
The failure of the body, yeah.
Because we are very closely attuned to the physical circumstances of the planet that we have evolved on.
Yes.
I mean, just for one example, when you go, here we stand upright on Earth and our brain is there and there's the top of our head. Go into space and the brain doesn't drift upwards, it just sort of expands gently until it presses against the cranium. There are innumerable instances where our bodies are not probably in the long term capable of adapting to other conditions. The moon, inhabiting the moon does not mean that we will become very tall and slim because of the lower gravity. It means our bodies are going to fail for numerous reasons.
Yes, we would need 1 million of years to become slim and tall on the moon, not 20 years. In 20 years we will simply be able to die much faster.
Yes, or slowly.
Or slowly, yes.
Yes, yeah. So,
so a lot of science fiction actually has turned into a sort of escapism, you know, because it's starting to believe as possible things which are clearly non-possible according to our current knowledge of technology, and on the other side, you know, it's unable to realize the real things that are really happening on different planes of reality in the present. I mean, they focus so much on technological changes, and then they miss the complete new sociological changes. You know, the more subtle developments in the fields of the non-exact sciences, which actually are the most mysterious of all, if we can...
yeah, it's quite possible that the universe itself is non-exact, which means it cannot be mathematically expressed by us. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I thought of a variation on the boiling frog. It is that in big mountain areas, populations which are adjusted to a particular climate zone are now moving upward as the planet becomes warmer due to climate change. Now they cannot continue moving upward permanently because they finally occupy the top, and there's nothing above that.
Yes, that's interesting. And if we would be able to watch it with a time-lapse movie, you know, then you would see the whole process, you know, and then see the alarming aspect of it. Also, in mountains, they tend to get closer together, narrower as you get towards the summit.
So there will be not only climate stress, but population density stress.
Yes, this is the kind of future, that we have to take into consideration.
Yeah, because this is based upon logic and upon also what is actually happening. So, I really despise journalists because they are milking the simplest little threat to provide their endless hours of empty noise.
I couldn't have expressed it better. This is really the ultimate definition.
We should finish there by now.
Yes.
After insulting the majority of the planet's reporters of false reality.
Yes, the problem is exactly this descent in irreality, in false reality, in the non-capability of perceiving reality, which actually was kind of inevitable if we think about that, with the world getting more and more complex and the evolution, the changes of things accelerating. At some point you have the accelerating things having to bypass the possibility of most of the humans to actually keep track with them.
Yeah. Well, we should stop now because I'm going to start coughing. This is not caused by coronavirus, but by bronchitis chronica, which is possibly due to the fact that I smoked with pleasure for 60 years.
Okay, on this note we can end our little discussion, and for those who didn't Google Ian Watson for now, we can say that he's one of the brightest science fiction authors the UK has ever expressed. He has written more than 50 books. He has written the screen story of the AI film made by Spielberg. He worked with Kubrick together for a lot of months, and he's my friend, which actually is the biggest feature, amico mio, in my own personal subjective perception, So,
sempre insieme. Sempre insieme. I put in an extra letter because I am speaking Spanish normally.
Cheers.
Arrivederci. Ciao.